Back. I want to take a moment to talk about Matthew chapter 24. We're going to be discussing the Antichrist, the Abomination of Desolation, and specifically the way that I came to the text, the way I have it rendered in the restored Gospel according to the Hebrews in the Rock of Sure Foundation that I've made available to you. There's going to be a link in the description if you want to download a copy of this Rock of Sure Foundation. You can download it. There's also going to be a link to where if you want to buy a copy, a copy of it is just $17.77 that you can get on Amazon and print on demand format. So I'm basically letting you have it for cost if you want it printed. If you are happy with the PDF, you can just download that for free. It's this document that I put together. Basically, what would the New Testament be if we didn't have the apostate Saul of Tarsus corrupting the Scripture? And so it is. Here's the table of contents here, and this is the documents that are in it. All of these are ancient documents. They're not something that I made up, aside from my own personal letter that I put in here. Everything else is ancient witnesses that come from the actual apostles, not from Saul of Tarsus and his corruptions. So in Matthew 24, it reads, Yeshua went out from the temple, and he was going on his way, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, You see all of these buildings? Most certainly I tell you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another which shall not be taken away, and this generation shall not pass until the destruction begin. So obviously from the context of what he's saying, he is speaking about the destruction of Jerusalem around the year 70 A.D. For they shall come and shall sit here and shall besiege it and shall slay your children here. As he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, John, and Andrew asked him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things take place? What is the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? So again, they're bringing it back to this thing that he said when they were in the temple. So the initial discussion here in the first two verses, this is while they were in Jerusalem. They were leaving from the temple, and he's telling them this. And then they come to him later when they're on the Mount of Olives, and they're like, hey, could you give us some more details about this? So the very first thing that Yeshua says to them, be careful that no one leads you astray. Now, in the Greek text, it reads the same, but here there's a difference in the next verse. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and will deceive and lead you astray. You astray. In the Greek, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Messiah, and will lead many astray. Okay, so where did the difference come from? We're looking at verse 5. So if we go to the Shem Tov, this is I'll show you the cover. All right. The Hebrew Matthew, the Shem Tov. This one is translated by George Howard. So if you spent very much time at all looking into the Hebrew Matthew, you're going to run across the Shem Tov. So that's what this is. So here's the Hebrew, and then we got the English next to it, and I think we're looking at verse 5. Many will come in my name, saying I'm the Messiah, and they will lead you astray. So I went with the Hebrew here. There are some portions of this Shem Tov that seem to indicate that the text itself is closer to the Gospel according to the Hebrews than it is the Greek than the Greek is. So for this particular passage, I went with the Shem Tov. So that's where, when it says lead you astray here in verse 5, that's why I went with this in this direction. They will lead you astray. So he's speaking to the apostles. Many will come in my name, saying that I, and it's not clear here if it's saying that the person speaking, the false prophet, is going to say, I am the Messiah, or if they're going to be saying that I, Yeshua, am the Messiah. I would, if I were you, I would prepare both ways. I would consider both ways, both as being a possibility. They're going to deceive and lead you astray. He's warning the apostles. He's, here in the Greek, it's warning anyone who reads this, right? But here he's specifically saying to the apostles, they're going to lead you astray. So it matches up with the previous verse. Be careful no one leads you astray. So people will say, well, it's obvious from reading the New Testament that the apostles accepted Paul. And even before I got into making this the rock of a sure foundation and looking into all these different versions to compare them, even then I was saying, well, they did initially. I wouldn't argue with that. I think they did give him at least the benefit of the doubt initially. You can see Acts 15 where he came as this delegate from Antioch, and they showed him respect. He was part of this assembly where they were discussing whether the Gentiles are saved after they're circumcised, whether it's before circumcision or after circumcision. So there's no argument that they accepted him. There's no evidence that they didn't. However, later on, as things progress, you can see that things fell apart. I mean, Paul himself admits that in the 2nd chapter of Galatians. Just look at the way he speaks about the apostles in the 1st and 2nd chapter of Galatians, but then in the 2nd chapter, he outright tells you about this dispute between him and him and Peter, and he admits in kind of a sideways manner, he admits that everyone turned against him. Even his partner Barnabas sided with him. But, of course, he still sticks to his guns and presents it as if he was in the right. But he admits that everyone else was against him. Peter, those from James, and even Barnabas were on one side and Paul was on the other. So Yeshua he's telling the apostles somebody's going to come along. They're going to come in Yeshua's name, saying he's the Messiah, and he's going to be a deceiver, and he's going to lead them astray. I didn't look at this beforehand. Let's just see what I've got. The Syriac here. The Syriac says, Yeshua answered and said to them, see that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying I'm the Messiah, and many will they lead astray. So here in the Syriac, it has, similar to what the Greek says, lead many astray. But the Hebrew, no doubt about it, lead you astray. You will hear of wars and hear rumors of wars. Beware lest you become foolish and troubled because of all this, because all of this shall occur, but the end will not be yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be pestilence, famine, earthquakes in various places. But all these things are the beginning of travail. Then they will deliver you over to tribulation and kill you. You will be hated by all of the Gentiles because of my name. Is this not true today? The apostles themselves are despised because they speak. If you're speaking in the name of the Messiah, you're speaking with his authority. And that's what the apostles do. They're speaking in his name versus the apostate who speaks in his own name. And if you go into a church and you speak to the pastor and say, well, I don't, I accept Jesus as the Messiah, but I don't accept Paul. They'll run you out of there. If they don't run you out, they'll make you want to leave. Like that, they'll kind of shun you in a way. But you will be judged if you don't accept Paul. However, if you were to go in there and say, hey, I'm not really down with Peter, I don't really like John, but I'm all about Paul. Paul. They have no problem with that. They'll love you. You just can't question Paul, which is why I say that it's obvious that Paul is their Messiah, not Jesus. Because if they believed, if they honestly believed, if they practiced what they preached, that Yeshua was the Messiah and Paul was an apostle, well, an apostle is just a sent one. He's like a dignitary. He's a representative. But you accept the person that sent the representative, but you don't really care for the representative too much. That shouldn't cause an issue, right? That shouldn't cause a conflict. Well, the important thing is you accept the one who sent them, right? An apostle by definition is one who is sent. So therefore, if you accept the sender, but you don't really like the messenger, that shouldn't be an issue. But by and large, the Gentiles do not care at all for the apostles. All they care about is the apostate. Then many shall be perturbed and will deal treacherously with one another and will be enraged among themselves. False prophets will arise and lead many astray. So now we're getting to the key paragraph. This is what I wanted to discuss. False prophets will arise and lead many astray. When wickedness is multiplied, the love of many will grow faint. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel will be preached in the whole world to a testimony to all the Gentiles concerning me. And the end will come. And then the end will come. This is the Antichrist. When therefore you see the abomination of desolation, which is spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judah or Judea flee to the mountains. Let he who is on the housetop not go down to take the things out that are in his house. Let him who is in the field not return to take his clothes. And it goes on. And so, but what I really wanted to look at was this. This is the Antichrist. So where did I get that from? Well, I got that from the Hebrew Shem Tov Matthew. We'll look at that in a minute. But I do want to just point out what the Greek says. Verse 14, this good news of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world for a testimony to the nations, and then the end will come. When therefore you see the abomination of desolation, which is spoken through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee. So those who are in Judah, this is talking about the land of Judah. So when you see the abomination of desolation, so see, verse 15, I stuck with what was in the Greek. But this reference to the Antichrist, like I said, that comes from the Hebrew Matthew. So the way that Mr. Howard renders this, he says, and this gospel, that is the Evangeli, will be preached in all the earth for a witness concerning me to all nations, and then the end will come. This is the Antichrist, and this is the abomination which desolates, which is spoken of by Daniel as standing in the holy place. Let the one who reads understand. And so this is where the reference to the Antichrist comes from. However, the way that it reads in the Shem Tov, the way that George Howard translated it, it doesn't make sense, because we know what the abomination of desolation is. Or I know. You should know if you've watched my series on Revelation Fulfilled. You know what it is, because I discussed this in chapter 12. And so this is the presentation that's recorded. So Yeshua, if we understand it in the Greek, When therefore you see the abomination of desolation, which is spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. So here is where Daniel the prophet speaks about the abomination that makes desolate. Daniel 12:9. He said, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand." So those who are wise shall understand. And if you go back over to here, let the reader understand. So again, you see this. Yeshua is admonishing us to understand. And who will understand? Those who are wise. So he's telling you to have wisdom in this section of the scripture. From the time that the continual burnt offering shall be taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. But go your way to the end, for you shall rest, and so forth. So here's the prophecy. There's going to be a time that the continual burnt offering is taken away. From that time, if you count 1,290 days, then you will see the abomination that makes desolate. And Yeshua is referring to this reference. He's saying the one spoken about by Daniel. So let's keep all this in context, right? Let's don't go off with any kind of crazy theories like people make about the book of Revelation. When you see this abomination, so we have to understand what Yeshua is saying here within the confines of what is being predicted by Daniel the prophet. So there's two timelines spoken about, 1,290 days and 1,335 days. We don't know what the blessing is. It just says, "Blessed is he who waits." So if we're talking about a time of danger, the continual burnt offerings are taken away. The abomination is set up. 42 months later, 1,290 days. When you reach this 1,290 days, the time of danger is still occurring. You got to make it to this 1,335 days. Well, if you make it there, if you get past that, then that's the end of the time of danger, the time of destruction. That's why you're blessed. So I'm because we have hindsight now, because this all has already happened. We can use that hindsight to be like, okay, so what is this blessing? Well, I can tell you what the blessing is because I know the history. If you made it past that 1,335 days, then you're past the point of danger, because we can look in the history and we can say, okay, that's when it ended. That's when the death and destruction came to an end. And that's how I know that. That's how I know now what the blessing is. But he doesn't tell you here really what the blessing is. So, if we go to Josephus, here's the reference. Josephus, War of the Jews, 6:2-1. It's book 6, section 2, chapter 1, or whatever it is. But I know it's book 6. It says, "And now Titus gave orders to his soldiers that were with him to dig up the foundations of the tower at Antonia, and to make him a ready passage for his army to come up, while he himself and Josephus," is Josephus speaking about himself in the third person, "brought to him, for he had been informed that on that day, which was the 17th day of Tammuz, the sacrifice called the daily sacrifice had failed and had not been offered to God." So Jerusalem is under siege. The Romans are not letting anyone come in or out of the city, and if you do come out of the city, you're going to be captured and possibly killed. And so naturally, they're not able to bring in animals to sacrifice in the temple. They have animals there, and then they run out of animals. They run out of animals to slaughter. So because they run out of animals, the daily sacrifice failed. Well, this says for want of men to offer it, and that the people were grievously troubled at it. So maybe that was it. Maybe they just didn't have a priest available, but I was under the impression it's because they ran out of animals. Either way, here you have the date that the sacrifice ceased. This 17th day of Tammuz. So, from the time that the continual burnt offering shall be taken away, which we know this date, 17th of Tammuz, until the abomination that makes desolate, 1,290 days. Okay, so we go forward 1,290 days. So Titus retired to the tower of Antonia and resolved to storm the temple the next day, early in the morning, with his whole army, and to encamp around about the holy house, the temple. But as for that house, God had for certain long ago doomed it to the fire, and now that fatal day was come. According to the revolution of ages, it was the 10th day of the month of Ab, Luz, upon which it was formerly burnt by the king of Babylon. So this is the same date that it was burnt by Nebuchadnezzar. So here we have a little further down, and so now the Romans, this is the next day, the day that they stormed the temple, upon the flight of the seditious into the city, and upon the burning of the holy house itself. So the temple's burning, and all the buildings around it, brought their ensigns into the temple and set them over against its eastern gate, and there they offered sacrifices to their ensigns. And there did they make Titus imperator and the greatest acclamation of joy. So here's the abomination. They were in the temple complex. They had set their standards with the eagles and the symbols of Rome up in the temple, and they were sacrificing to these ensigns in their imperial cult worship. This is the abomination that made desolate. They were making sacrifices to their pagan gods in the temple complex of Yahweh. This is the abomination of desolation. This was 1,290 days after the sacrifices had ended, which fit perfectly with what Daniel said. So now, what is the 1,335 days? Well, we actually have that information too, because the slaughter at Masada occurred. So these people Masada died with this intention, so they killed themselves. And the Romans end up getting into Masada on the 15th day of the month of Nisan, which was 1,335 days after the sacrifices were stopped. So here you have the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy to the day. And in order to know that, you have to read Josephus' War of the Jews, and you have to do the math and figure up the days. There's also a 42-month period mentioned in the book of Revelation where Nero was making war with the saints. And so that's actually in there too. It's a different 42 months. It's not this 42 months. So there's two different 42-month timelines, but Nero's persecution was one of those, where the beast is waging war against the saints. And that started in it ended in 68 when Nero killed himself. But if you count back 42 months from that, that's when the Neronic persecution began against the saints. So all of these were fulfilled in the first century, all these timelines. But what Yeshua is speaking about here, the abomination and desolation spoken about by Daniel, this was fulfilled in the first century at the destruction of Jerusalem. So it does not make sense the way it reads in the Shem Tov. This is the Antichrist, and this is the abomination which desolates, spoken about by Daniel. Okay, they're two different things. The Antichrist, you can tell, is a person, or And it's not a specific person, I don't think, because John speaks about there being many antichrists. And he also mentions that the Antichrist is a spirit. So, putting these different statements about the Antichrist together, it appears that the Antichrist is a name for a person who acts a certain way, and they may or may not be possessed by this spirit of Antichrist. Like, you have to take the sum total of everything that's said about the Antichrist. But it doesn't fit what is being said in the Shem Tov. The Antichrist is not the same as the Abomination of Desolation. The Abomination of Desolation, we know what that is. That was the Roman army coming in, setting up their standards, and making sacrifices to them in the temple, which is not the same thing as Antichrist. So, this brings me into kind of a little bit of a segue. And I don't have the verse pulled up in the Clementine recognitions and homilies, or the Nazarene Acts and the sermons of Peter. But Peter, when he's speaking about baptism, he mentions the reason for baptism is because in the days of creation, when the Spirit of Yahweh was hovering over the waters, now this is what Peter says. He says that this Spirit left a special blessing or a special anointing upon the water itself, and that the water, and Peter, speaking in his day, said the water to this day still retains this special power given to it by the Spirit of Yahweh. Which, in a way, it makes sense. I mean, water is vital to life. In some ways, you could say that water is a life giver or a life preserver at the least. And that could possibly be because of this power that was given to the water by Yahweh in the beginning of creation. But Peter says because it retains this special blessing or this special power, that is the source of the power of regeneration at baptism, is when you're baptized, born again / born from above, and this rebirth is what brings you into the family of Yahweh. And you can see in the restored Gospel of the Hebrews, it has some more details about Yeshua's baptism, and you can see the power that the people witnessed at his baptism. It says that there was the waters lit up, and that there was fire that came down upon the waters, and the Spirit, the heavens were open, and the Spirit of God came and entered into Yeshua, and all this stuff that's been removed from the Greek Matthew, and it's very much toned down to where you don't see that. But Yeshua's baptism was obviously a very powerful event, and the way that baptism itself is spoken about by Peter in his sermons and in the Nazarene Acts, it's obvious that the early church believed that there was a power to baptism also. It was not just some optional little archaic ritual that it's, you don't even have to do it, which is the way it's presented today in the church. And so knowing that information and knowing what Yeshua said, I've taken note of the fact that when I'm researching a topic, and it's not just when I was researching the Gospel according to the Hebrews, this is something that I can bear witness to going back several years. When I am researching a topic into a teaching of Yeshua, trying to understand one of these early doctrines from the church, it is very, very often that I will be puzzled over something, and in the shower, taking a shower, and it comes to me then. Like, the answer comes to me there in the shower, in the water. And when it first started happening, yeah, it could have been a coincidence, but it's something that happens many, many times. And so it's no longer something I could just dismiss as a coincidence. this is one of those things that I was puzzling about. So I was looking at what it says in George Howard's translation here. This is the Antichrist and the Abomination, and I was asking God. I was like, I know what the Abomination is. This is not like, this is something I was very sure about. Like, I'm very sure what the Abomination of Desolation is. I didn't understand how Antichrist could also be the Abomination of Desolation. So in the shower, I'm thinking about that. I've been thinking about this for like 2 days. In the shower, put my head under the water to shampoo my hair, and instantly I get the answer. I mean, I know it right away. The Antichrist is placed in verse 15. Of course, the verses, for the most part, are made up. They're not, the way it reads here, where it has verse numbers and such, that's probably not the way it actually reads in the text, the Hebrew text. These verse numbers were inserted after the fact. But if you take this Antichrist and connect it up here to verse 14 instead of placing it in verse 15, then you get your answer. Because if you notice here in verse 15, it's not in 15. I mean, it's not in 14 either. But why are we connecting it in 15? Why don't we have it up here in 14? And that, my friends, that is the solution. That's the solution that came to me from nowhere in the water, and with my head under the shower water. Something that happens frequently is that I get this revelation. So in the there's this book, the Panarion. It's written by Epiphanius in the 4th century. He was a bishop of the Catholic Church. Epiphanius was, and he lived in Palestine. He was in Jerusalem. He knew Ebionites. He was a first-hand witness to what the Ebionites believed and taught. And he mentioned that the Ebionites were daily baptizers. They didn't. They were not like the Orthodox Christians, who you get baptized one time and that's it. And you can see that in the sermons of Peter and the Nazarene Acts, is that it's mentioned often that Peter goes down to the water to bathe in the morning. And this is one of the things that Epiphanius in the Panarion is very critical of them. He says that they blaspheme Peter and malign him. And they have this book, the Ebionites have this book called The Travels of Peter, which sounds a whole heck of a lot like the Nazarene Acts. But Epiphanius says they blaspheme and malign Peter because they say that he bathes every day. Like, oh my goodness, I hope no one ever writes about me and says that I bathe every day. Like that's some type of blasphemy against you or something. But Peter is described as being this daily bather, a daily baptizer. And so when we read through the Clementine, the sermons of Peter, trying to get with the correct title, or the Nazarene Acts, it makes it, you can figure out the way they viewed baptism. It was obviously an initiation type of thing like it is today in the Orthodox Church. If you are a new convert, you go in and you get baptized, and you're baptized into the church. But the way that Peter's view was different and the Ebionites' view was different is that it was also an ongoing thing. So you have the initiation baptism, but then you also can self-baptize from that point forward as a purification of sins. So, for myself, sometimes, when I don't do this every day because I don't always remember it, but when I'm in the shower and I think of it, I'll ask God. I'll say, God, please, wash away my iniquity and cleanse me from my sins. Any sins that I've, obviously committed unintentionally. And I treat showering as a type of baptism in the same way that Peter was. Heavenly Father, wash away my iniquity, cleanse me from my sins, is something that the Catholic priest says. Like when I was an altar boy, you are up there doing the Eucharist service with the priest, and that's what he would say when he would wash his hands as part of the Eucharist service. And it's just one of those things I retain in my memory, and I feel like it's appropriate to use at that moment. So if you're ever prayerfully contemplating something, asking God for an answer about something, ask Him when you're bathing. You're in the water has a special power, and divine revelation will come to you if God desires you to have it. But it is one of those places and one of those things that I've noticed and taken note of, and it confirms what Peter teaches in his sermons and in the Nazarene Acts about water having this special power. So this revelation came to me at that moment. Put my head under the water. The revelation came immediately that the Antichrist actually was about the preceding verses and not verse 15. So I retained in my restored gospel according to the Hebrews that I put together, I retained the reading of verse 15 from the Greek. Also in the Old Syriac, verse 15. Now, at what time you have seen the sign of abomination of desolation that was said by Daniel the prophet, he that reads, let him understand. They that are in Judea, let them flee to the hill country. The Old Syriac, which is the earliest complete manuscript of the four Gospels that we have, it's in Syriac, which is it's like Aramaic, but instead of being written in normal Aramaic letters, it's written with these like Syriac letters or whatnot. This is how it reads. It reads very similar to the Greek. So I retained the Greek. When therefore you see the abomination of desolation, which has been spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So that's how I dealt with this contradiction. And I moved the Antichrist reference up into verse 14, where I believe it belongs. So now, here's Yeshua's warning. False prophets will arise and lead many astray. Wickedness is multiplied, love of many will grow faint, but he who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel will be preached. This gospel, the gospel of the false prophets, is preached to the whole world. So this changes the meaning of what's being said versus what's in the Greek. This false prophets, the false gospel, this is the Antichrist. So now that you see how this is how I rendered it, because this is the way I think is correct. Again, this is not this writing. This is a restoration, a reconstruction of the gospel according to the Hebrews. So we're trying to correct the alterations that have been made through the years to the text. So this rendering here, that the Antichrist is the false prophets and the false gospel, basically this false religion is the religion of the Antichrist. Let's summarize it that way. That's what seems to be the message of this paragraph here. Let's see if that lines up with what these other sources are saying, and also if Daniel the prophet was speaking about something similar to what I said, like when the temple is destroyed by the Romans, that then the abomination and desolation is going to be set up. So let's let's do a search. We'll search through the document because that's the easiest way to do it. So if we look up abomination, and we'll do a quick search through the document for that. It should just take a minute or so. Okay, so here's all the occurrences of abomination. So we've got this one here, which we're talking about. Here it is from the Nazarene Acts, Book 1, Chapter 64. For we, said I, have ascertained beyond a doubt that God is much angered with the sacrifices you offer, the time of sacrificing having now passed away. And because you will not acknowledge that the time for offering victims is now past, therefore the temple shall be destroyed, and the abomination of desolation shall stand in the holy place. And the gospel shall be preached to the Gentiles for testimony against you. So this is, I think this is Peter speaking. So this is where they're debating with the priests in the temple, and all the apostles are going in there with James. And so yeah, apparently this is Peter. This specifically is Peter's statement. So they were enraged with him, the priests were, because he foretold the overthrow of the temple. So what we just discussed here was the overthrow of the temple, and the abomination of desolation occurs immediately after that. It reads like it was the same day. So here in this day they were preparing to storm the temple, and here they did, and the abomination of desolation was set up, which aligns perfectly with what Peter is describing here. He is not describing a false gospel of the Antichrist. He is describing something specific being set up in the place where the temple is, the holy place. Here is Nazarene Acts, Book 3, Chapter 61, and he's speaking about the pairs. So these are the pairs that are going to, throughout history, are going to come with, the first one's going to have a false message and then a true message. So the seventh is the tempter and the son of man. This is where Satan tempted Yeshua for 40 days. The eighth, Simon Magus and Peter. The ninth, the sower of the tares and the evangel that is sent out for repentance after the holy place has been destroyed, and for its desolation they set up an abomination. So this here, Peter is connecting the abomination that makes desolate with the destruction of the temple, and something is set up there. The sower of the tares and the evangel, now this sower of the tares, that could be the Antichrist. And that would kind of make sense, because here, the Antichrist is mentioned right alongside of the abomination and desolation, but they're two separate things. They're not the same thing. Which here, they're not the same thing. Here's the sower of the tares, Antichrist, and the abomination and desolation. So this reading here, lines up perfectly with this. Other mentions, this is not speaking about the abomination, desolation. This is about idolatry. This is from the book of Revelation, speaking about the cup of abominations, and then this says at the end of chapter 21 of Revelation, telling you who will and won't let someone in be admitted into New Jerusalem. So the ones that are actually apply to the abomination and desolation, these two references, they fit with the way that this reads here, the way that I reconstructed it in my gospel according to the Hebrews reconstruction. So if we now look up, let's do a search for Antichrist and see what that says. See if it seems to indicate the other references to the Antichrist. We'll search. So what we're going to be looking for is the other references to the Antichrist should read as either false prophets or a false gospel. And if it does, then that should confirm that the way that we've rendered it here in Matthew 24 is the way that Yeshua originally presented it. So the first two references are just from this page. We'll go to the next one. Nazarene Acts, book 3, chapter 61. We just mentioned this. So the 10th of the pairs is the Antichrist and the Messiah. So this is something that has always kind of puzzled me about this. Just as a side note, when I read about these pairs, you have the tempter and the Son of Man, and then you have the Antichrist and the Messiah. So if we have these 10 pairs, and this pair here, does that not, if the Antichrist is Satan and the Messiah is the Son of Man, then the 7th pair and the 10th pair are the same. So it's not 10 pairs, it's 9 pairs. So it doesn't make sense. Like, and I'm telling you, like, I'm not questioning this whole thing about it. The question is, I guess, is the Messiah and the Son of Man here the same person? Is this both speaking about Yeshua? Is the tempter and the Antichrist the same person? Is the Antichrist the same as the sower of tares? Because it sounds like it's the same. It just seems like there's some crossover between these pairs. And this is something, honestly, in my own personal quest for this information, this is something that I don't quite understand. Here is a reference, 306. This is only in the Syriac. It's not found in the Latin. So the part that's in brackets is not in the Latin. It says, "But the Antichrist comes and prepares helpful miracles, so that by him these shall be led astray, who had not formerly believed in him," in the 9th pair, "who forewarned and proclaimed eternal life to those who would remain righteous." So I have questions about this, not questions like I doubt it. Why would the element or the person from one pair also be included in another pair, unless the Messiah and the Son of Man are two separate people? And I'm not necessarily saying that's the case. I'm just saying this is a little this has always raised questions for me about the way that this is presented. But the point is, the Antichrist is definitely not the same as the Abomination and Desolation. Here we have 1 John. John mentions the Antichrist several times. "Little children, these are the end times, and you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, and even now many Antichrists have arisen. By this we know that it is the final hour. They went out from us, but they did not belong to us. For if they had belonged to us, they would have continued with us." So John is connecting the Antichrists, plural, to being people that were part of the original assembly, which sounds a lot like the way I understand Paul to be, that Paul was part of the assembly. They realized he was teaching something different and leading people astray, and so there was a separation. John here is saying that there was the Antichrist were part of their assembly, and then they went out from them. They separated. Lines up with what I understand about Paul. "But they left, that they might be revealed that none of them belong to us. You have an anointing from the Holy One, and you have all knowledge. I have not written to you because you do not know because you don't know the truth, but because you know it, and because no lie is of the truth. Who is the liar but he who denies that Yeshua is Messiah? This is the Antichrist, he who denies the Father and the Son. Who denies the Son does not have the Father. He who confesses the Son has the Father also." So, whoever denies the Son doesn't have the Father. So if any of you guys are saying that there are people out there who deny the Son. And of those people who deny the Son, they don't have the Father. So if you're calling people who deny the Son the chosen people of the Father, you're wrong, according to John. Also, John is saying, if you deny that Yeshua is the Messiah, you're the Antichrist. Well, that kind of goes back to my previous question that I had up here. It's like, about the pairs. So is Yeshua the Son of Man? Are these the same person? So I don't understand how you could have two pairs of people, but people from one, the person up here in this one pair could also be the person in the other pair. The way that Peter describes it, it sounds like all of these pairs are different people. Like there's no repeats up here. The second pair is the giants and Noah, then Pharaoh and Abraham, and the Philistines and Isaac, Esau and Jacob, and so on. I don't know. That's something that has kind of confused me. But here you can see from John, his description of the Antichrist fits the description of the Antichrist here, where it's concerning the false prophets and false gospel. Also in 1 John chapter 4, Beloved, don't believe every spirit, but test the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit who confesses that Yeshua is the Messiah has come in the flesh. Every spirit who confesses that Yeshua is Messiah has come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit who doesn't confess that Yeshua is the Messiah has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of Antichrist. So, if you're saying that Yeshua didn't come in the flesh, you're not of God, and you have the spirit of Antichrist. So, if we go to, let's see, I think Romans 8:3. Romans 8:3. For what the law couldn't do, in that it was weak in the flesh, God did, sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. In the likeness of sinful. So he wasn't actually flesh. He just is in the likeness of flesh. The similitude of flesh, as some translations say. The other was Philippians 2:7. Philippians 2:7. But he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being made in the likeness of men. The likeness of flesh. So who's the Antichrist according to John? Who do we see in the Bible, in the New Testament, that denies that Yeshua came in the flesh? There's one voice here saying that Yeshua came in the likeness of flesh. It is in the world already. You are of God, little children, have overcome, because greater is he who's in you than he's in the world. And so here you see that this Antichrist is being connected to someone with a false gospel, which again connects back up here. False prophets, this gospel, this false gospel. The next reference to the Antichrist is in my footnote. John's second letter. For many deceivers have gone out into the world. Those who don't confess that Yeshua is the Messiah come in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch yourselves that you don't lose things which we have accomplished, which we receive a full reward. Whoever transgresses and doesn't remain in the teachings of the Messiah doesn't have God. So here, John is connecting it to deceivers who deny Yeshua came in the flesh. So again, this once again lines up with the way that we're showing it here. Finally, the last reference is in the sermons of Peter, book 2, chapter 17. After this, also toward the end, Antichrist must first come, and then our Yeshua must be revealed to be indeed the Messiah. And after this, eternal light having sprung up, all the things of darkness must disappear. So, Antichrist, Again, this is a person being spoken about, or persons. This actually goes back to what we looked at here in the pairs, Antichrist and Messiah. So that was in the Nazarene Acts, and here you have it in the sermons of Peter. Antichrist, Messiah. The Messiah here is indeed Yeshua, but once again, I find it odd. Maybe you don't find it odd, but I find it odd that it seems like the 10th pair and the 7th pair are very similar, especially if we figure the Antichrist is working in the spirit of the tempter. Certainly if Messiah and the Son of Man, I don't know, is it really just 9 pairs and not 10 pairs? That's a question, I guess, for another time, or something to consider and to think about. But if you guys are looking through this gospel according to the Hebrews, and you get to this point, and you notice that it differs from the Greek Matthew, now you know why I rendered it this way. Now you know where Antichrist came from. It came from the Shem Tov Hebrew. And honestly, like a lot of the smaller changes in the rock that are different than what's in the Greek, the vast majority of the differences, most of them are small, but the most of the differences between the Greek and my restoration of the Hebrew comes from the Shem Tov, or comes from one of the other Hebrew versions of Matthew that we have. That's now, the Shem Tov is not obviously the gospel according to the Hebrews, because it doesn't contain all these additional texts that we know of that were in the gospel according to the Hebrews. It is a version of Matthew that's very, very similar to the Greek, but there are some small differences. So if you notice a small difference where it's just like one word, if you were to look in the Shem Tov, that's probably where you're going to find my source for that change. Nothing in the gospel according to the Hebrews that I reconstructed, none of it's just made up. It all comes from some source that I trust. There's a couple of things in it from the Gospel of Thomas. There's a couple of things in it from there's a lot of things in it from the Hebrew Matthew, and but the point is, there's a source for it. It's not anything that I just thought sounded good, so I put it in there. So anyway, thank you for listening, and I pray that this is giving you a new perspective, or giving you some things to think about. And thank you for listening. Shalom.